The massive ships appeared without warning. They emerged from the darkness beyond Neptune's orbit, their metal hulls gleaming under the distant sunlight. Each vessel was larger than Earth's biggest cities, and there were hundreds of them. At first, the world's astronomers thought they were looking at a mistake in their instruments, but within hours, every major observatory on the planet had confirmed the same thing. Earth was no longer alone in the universe. Admiral James Webber stood at the window of the United Earth Defense Force headquarters, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. At 62, he had spent 4 decades preparing for this moment, though he had never truly believed it would come. The morning sun cast long shadows across the command center, where dozens of officers worked at their stations in tense silence. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Rogers from her monitoring station. "The objects have passed Mars' orbit. They're maintaining their course directly toward Earth." Webber nodded, his reflection grim in the reinforced glass. "Alert status. All major military forces worldwide are at maximum readiness," Rogers reported. "Chinese carriers are in position. Russian aerospace forces are airborne. U.S. defensive systems are armed and tracking." For the first time in human history, every nation's military stood united, their weapons pointed at the same threat. Old enemies shared targeting data. Former adversaries coordinated defense plans. Humanity had found its unity in the face of the unknown. The alien fleet's approach was deliberate, almost ceremonial. They made no attempt to hide their presence or evade Earth's primitive detection systems. Their confidence was clear. They saw no threat in Earth's defenses. "Admiral," Lieutenant Rogers' voice cracked slightly. "We're receiving a transmission. It's being broadcast on all frequencies, in every major language on Earth." Webber turned from the window. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, showing a humanoid figure seated on what could only be described as a throne. Its features were similar enough to humanity's to be recognizable, yet alien enough to send chills down Webber's spine. The being wore an ornate uniform covered in what appeared to be military decorations. "People of Earth," the figure spoke, its voice translated into perfect English. "I am High Commander Marcus of the Galactic Imperial Fleet. Your world has been chosen for integration into our domain. Your technology has reached the minimum threshold for contact, and your resources have been deemed valuable. Resistance is unnecessary and would only result in needless destruction." Webber watched as similar messages played out on screens across the globe. In Beijing, Moscow, Washington, and every other capital, leaders gathered in emergency sessions. The UN Security Council convened in record time, with even the most hostile nations sending representatives. "They're scanning us," Rogers reported, her eyes fixed on her instruments. "Deep scans. They're mapping every military installation, every power plant, every major population center." Webber allowed himself a small smile. They wouldn't find the important things, the hidden facilities, the experimental weapons, the true extent of humanity's preparations. For decades, Earth had suspected it wasn't alone, and it had prepared accordingly. "Sir," Rogers looked up from her station, "the UN Security Council is requesting your presence at the emergency session. They're gathering every major military commander." "Tell them I'm on my way." Webber straightened his uniform and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at the command center. "And Lieutenant, initiate Protocol Omega, just in case." Around the world, deep underground facilities hummed to life. Hidden bunkers opened their blast doors. Retired veterans received prearranged signals. Civilian factories began their carefully planned conversion to military production. Plans decades in the making quietly activated. As Webber's helicopter lifted off toward New York, he watched the morning sun glint off the distant forms of Earth's gathered naval fleets. American carriers floated alongside Chinese destroyers. British submarines shared waters with Russian cruisers. The old world order had dissolved in a matter of hours. The Empire had made their first move. Now it was Earth's turn to respond, and Webber had a feeling they weren't going to like what humanity had to say. In New York, as world leaders gathered, Dr. Robert Miller, head of the Global Historical Archives, prepared the response that would change everything. Not with missiles or armies, but with a history lesson the empire would never forget. The United Nations chamber had never been so full. World leaders sat shoulder to shoulder, their usual protocols and seating arrangements forgotten. Military commanders lined the walls, their decorated uniforms creating a patchwork of Earth's combined military might. The air was thick with tension and whispered conversations in dozens of languages. Dr. Robert Miller waited quietly in a side room, reviewing his notes one final time. At 58, he had spent his entire career studying humanity's conflicts. His office walls were lined with photos of battlefields throughout history. Now those studies would face their greatest test. Admiral Weber entered the side room, his face showing the strain of the past 12 hours. "Dr. Miller, they're ready for you. Are you sure about this approach?" Miller nodded, gathering his materials. "Admiral, they expect a military response. They're prepared for threats, demands, or displays of force. But they need to understand exactly what they're dealing with." The main chamber fell silent as Miller took the podium. Above them, the massive view screen showed the waiting face of High Commander Marcus, his Imperial regalia gleaming under distant lights. "High Commander," Miller began, his voice steady, "I am not a military leader or a political figure. I am a historian, keeper of humanity's records. Before you proceed with your plans, there's something you need to understand about us." Miller pressed a button, and images began to appear on the screen beside him. This was World War I, humanity's first global conflict. Millions died in trenches, fighting over a few feet of mud. We invented new ways to kill each other: poison gas, tanks, aircraft. The images changed. World War II. Cities reduced to ash. Weapons that could level mountains. 60 million dead. But we didn't stop fighting. We didn't stop advancing. High Commander Marcus's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes as Miller continued through humanity's bloody history. We split the atom to make weapons that could destroy cities. We turned diseases into weapons. We built missiles that could cross oceans. We did this all while fighting among ourselves, never truly united. Miller paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Until now. The chamber was completely silent. Even the translators seemed to hold their breath. "You see, Commander, humanity has never been at peace. In our recorded history of roughly 10,000 years, we have had less than 300 years total without war somewhere on our planet. We've fought over land, resources, ideas, and sometimes simply because we disagreed." Miller switched to a new set of images: military installations, weapons tests, training exercises. Every weapon we've created, every tactic we've developed, every strategy we've mastered, they've all been tested in real combat. Not simulations, not exercises. Real war with real consequences. Our technology might seem primitive to you. Our ships might seem small, our weapons basic, but everything we have, we built while trying to kill each other. Every advance we've made has been forged in conflict. The historian's voice grew softer, but somehow more intense. "And now, for the first time in our history, you've given us something remarkable. A common enemy. You've done what no force on Earth has ever managed. You've united us." Miller stepped closer to the screen, his eyes locked with the alien commanders. "This isn't a threat, High Commander. This is a warning from someone who has spent his life studying what humans do when we're backed into a corner. We don't surrender. We don't give up. We fight harder, think smarter, and do whatever it takes to survive." He gestured to the military commanders lining the walls. "These leaders, they've spent their careers trying to kill each other. Now they're sharing plans, combining forces, pooling resources. Ask yourself, what does it mean when a species that spent its entire existence fighting itself suddenly turns all of that experience, all of that knowledge, all of that determination in a single direction?" The chamber remained deathly quiet as Miller delivered his final words. You're not offering us integration into your empire, Commander. You're offering us a singular purpose, and I fear you won't like what humanity does with that gift. Dr. Miller's fingers moved across the control panel with practiced ease. The chamber's lights dimmed, and new images filled the massive screens. Behind him, world leaders and military commanders watched in silence as humanity's violent history played out before the Empire's eyes. "Let me show you what we're capable of," Miller said, his voice echoing in the darkness. "This is Hiroshima, 1945. One bomb, one plane, one city destroyed in seconds." The screen showed the familiar mushroom cloud, then the devastation below. "We did this to ourselves, Commander. And then we made stronger weapons." High Commander Marcus leaned forward on his throne, his alien features showing the first signs of concern. The Imperial advisors visible in the background had stopped their usual whispered conversations. "Our advancement accelerated after that," Miller continued. "In just 60 years, we went from basic flight to landing on our moon. In another 60, we had ships patrolling our solar system." He paused, allowing a small smile. "The ones you can see, at least." The screens shifted to modern warfare footage. Precision missiles threading through windows, drones striking targets from miles away, submarines capable of staying underwater for months. Every year, we find new ways to fight, new ways to survive, new ways to win. Admiral Weber stepped forward, nodding to Miller. "Show them the classified files." Miller pressed another button, and new images appeared. Hidden military bases built inside mountains, experimental aircraft that seemed to defy physics, weapon systems that hadn't been revealed to the public. "We've been preparing for something like this for decades," Weber explained, taking over. "Every major nation has secret programs, hidden capabilities. What you've detected with your scans, that's what we wanted you to see." The screens displayed a massive underground facility. "This is just one of hundreds of bunkers worldwide. We built them during our Cold War, when we nearly destroyed ourselves. Then we built more, bigger ones, deeper ones, after we realized we weren't alone in the universe." Miller brought up new data, showing humanity's rate of technological advancement. "Notice the pattern, Commander. Every major war pushed us forward. World War I gave us aircraft and tanks. World War II gave us rockets and nuclear weapons. The Cold War gave us space travel and computers. Even our smaller conflicts drove innovation." The historian walked closer to the screen showing High Commander Marcus's face. "But here's what should worry you most." He gestured, and new footage began playing. Scenes of civilians rising up against oppression, guerrilla fighters holding off larger forces, cities rebuilding from ashes. "We don't just fight with weapons and armies. We fight with everything we have. Our civilians turn into soldiers. Our factories convert to military production in days. Our scientists work harder under pressure. And we never, ever forget our enemies." The screens now showed Earth's combined military forces. Chinese tanks rolling alongside American ones, Russian fighters flying formation with NATO aircraft, Indian and Pakistani ships patrolling together. "Your arrival has given us something we've never had before," Miller continued. "Complete unity. Every weapon, every soldier, every resource we have, all pointed in one direction. For the first time in human history, we have no other enemies to fight." Admiral Weber stepped forward again. "We're showing you this because you need to understand. Your empire has conquered other worlds. Primitive ones, advanced ones, it doesn't matter. But you've never faced a species that spent its entire existence fighting itself. We've had more wars in our recorded history than most species have had meals." Miller pressed one final button, and the screens went dark except for a single image. Earth, seen from space, beautiful and blue. "This is our home," Miller said softly. "We've fought over every inch of it. We've died for it countless times, and we've never faced an external threat before." He looked directly at High Commander Marcus. "Ask yourself this. If we're willing to do all this to ourselves, what would we do to you?" The silence that followed was deafening. High Commander Marcus's expression had changed completely, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked very much like uncertainty. High Commander Marcus stood in the war room of the Imperial flagship, his normally perfect posture showing signs of strain. The massive holographic display of Earth rotated slowly in the center of the room, surrounded by the Empire's most experienced military leaders. "They're savages," General Reed declared, his scaled hand waving dismissively at the display. "Look at their technology. Their ships can barely reach their own moon. Their weapons are primitive. Their defenses are obvious and predictable." Thomas, the youngest member of the War Council, studied the data scrolling across his screen. At just 30 standard years old, he had earned his position through brilliant strategic analysis rather than years of service. Something about Earth's presentation troubled him deeply. "Sir," Thomas spoke up, his voice careful but clear, "I've analyzed their conflict patterns. They're unusual. Most species we've encountered had 3 or 4 major wars before achieving unity. Earth has had thousands." Marcus turned to face the young tactician. "Explain." Thomas stood and approached the hologram. "Their wars aren't just about territory or resources. They fight over ideas, beliefs, and sometimes seemingly nothing at all. But look at what each conflict produced." He gestured, and the display showed Earth's technological progression. Every war pushed them forward. They don't just fight, they innovate under pressure. "Irrelevant," General Reed interrupted. "Our ships could glass their entire surface in hours. Their weapons can't even reach our orbit effectively." "Are we sure about that?" Thomas asked quietly. He brought up the scan data. "Our deep scans show their military capabilities, yes. But look at these power readings. Look at these underground structures. They're too deep, too well shielded for complete analysis. Why would a primitive species have such advanced shielding technology?" The war room fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus stepped closer to the hologram, studying the planet with new eyes. "And there's something else," Thomas continued. "Their response to our arrival. Most species panic. Their governments fight each other for our favor. Their militaries collapse in disarray." He pulled up live footage of Earth's combined fleet movements. But Earth united in ours. Former enemies are coordinating like they've trained together for years. General Reed snorted. "You're seeing patterns that don't exist, boy. They're showing us everything they have, trying to frighten us with their little weapons and their violent history." "No," Thomas shook his head. "Think about it. If they're as warlike as their history shows, as paranoid as their bunkers suggest, would they really show us everything? In every war they fought, deception was a key strategy. Why would they abandon that now?" Marcus raised his hand, silencing the brewing argument. Continued, Thomas. "Their spokesman wasn't a warrior or a leader. He was a historian. He didn't threaten us. He warned us. That's unprecedented." Thomas looked around the room. "Every species we've conquered either surrendered immediately or threatened us with their strongest weapons. Earth did neither. They just showed us their history and asked us to think carefully." The room was quiet again, broken only by the soft hum of the hologram projector. Marcus walked slowly around the display, watching the movements of Earth's military forces. "What's your recommendation, Thomas?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Sir, I believe we're seeing exactly what they want us to see. Their visible defenses, their obvious military installations. They're not their real strength. They're showing us the tip of the iceberg, as they would say." "You suggest we delay the invasion?" Marcus asked, his voice neutral. "I suggest we consider the cost," Thomas replied carefully. "We've never encountered a species that turned its entire history of war against itself into preparation for external threats. We don't know what they're truly capable of because they've been hiding capabilities from themselves for centuries." General Reed laughed sharply. "You would have us fear primitive apes with primitive weapons." "No," Thomas said quietly. I would have us fear a species that spent its entire existence perfecting the art of war and has just found its first true external enemy." Marcus stared at the hologram for a long moment before straightening his uniform. "The invasion will proceed as planned. Prepare the fleet." As the War Council filed out, Thomas remained behind, watching Earth's nations continue to unite their forces with unprecedented speed and precision. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to learn exactly why Earth's warning had been so calm, so measured, and so final. The world changed in ways no one could have predicted. Ancient enemies became allies. Borders that had been fought over for centuries became meaningless. Humanity had spent its entire existence divided, but now it moved with single-minded purpose. Admiral Weber watched from the command center as another wave of retired veterans arrived at the military base. Men and women who hadn't worn uniforms in decades walked with straight backs and determined faces. They knew what was coming. "Status report," Weber called out, his eyes fixed on the global deployment map. Lieutenant Rogers worked at her station, data streaming across her screens. Chinese submarines are in position in the Pacific. Russian aerospace forces have completed their deployment. European missile defense systems are fully operational. But it wasn't just the military that was transforming. Every factory, every laboratory, every resource on Earth was being redirected. Car plants now produced tank parts. Smartphone manufacturers switched to making military communications equipment. Pharmaceutical companies worked round the clock on defensive measures against potential alien bioweapons. Dr. Miller stood in his office at the Global Historical Archives, watching as his life's work was put to immediate use. Military strategists studied ancient battles for tactics that might work against the Empire. Engineers examined historical weapons for ideas that could be updated with modern technology. "Dr. Miller," his assistant called from the doorway. "The weapons development team needs the files on guerrilla warfare tactics from the 20th century, and the Space Command wants everything we have on asymmetric warfare." Miller nodded, already moving to retrieve the files. "Send copies to every major military command. They need to understand what worked in the past when facing superior forces." Underground, the real preparations were taking place. Hidden facilities that hadn't seen light in decades hummed with activity. Projects that had been theoretical were now rushed into production. Weapons that had been deemed too dangerous for Earth's wars were brought out of storage. In a deep bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Thompson toured the rows of experimental aircraft. They didn't look like traditional military planes. Their shapes defied conventional aerodynamics. Decades of reverse engineering crashed UFOs, and studying theoretical physics had led to these machines. "How many can we deploy?" he asked the chief engineer. 50 are ready now. Another 100 will be operational within 48 hours. They've never been tested in actual combat, but the simulations are promising." Similar scenes played out around the world. In the Sahara, massive doors opened in the desert floor, revealing missile silos that no satellite had ever detected. Beneath the Antarctic ice, a network of bases activated their defense systems. In the Amazon, hidden research facilities began powering up prototype shields. At the United Nations, the newly formed Earth Defense Council met continuously. Representatives from every nation shared intelligence, coordinated movements, and prepared for humanity's first unified war. "The Empire expects us to either surrender or fight as separate nations," the Council chairman announced. "They don't understand what they've done. For the first time in human history, we have no choice but to stand together." Admiral Weber received hourly updates as Earth's transformation continued. Every satellite was repurposed for military use. Every ship at sea was integrated into a single command structure. Every Air Force trained together, learning to coordinate in ways that would have been impossible days before. But perhaps most surprisingly, there was no panic among the civilian population. Humanity had spent generations preparing for disaster, through movies, books, and games. Now that it was really happening, people fell into their roles with grim determination. "Sir," Lieutenant Rogers called out. "Final confirmation. All deep space weapons platforms are online. Hidden fleet elements are in position. Ground-based defenses are ready. Weber nodded, studying the tactical display. The Empire's ships still held position beyond Mars, probably planning their attack. They had no way of knowing that their every movement was being tracked by sensors they couldn't detect. "Send word to all commands," Weber ordered. "Initial defensive positions are set. Begin Phase 2 deployment." Across Earth, the second layer of humanity's defenses began to emerge. The Empire thought they had seen Earth's military capability. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The Empire's attack began at dawn. Their massive ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons charging as they entered the Earth's outer defense zone. High Commander Marcus stood on his bridge, watching with satisfaction as his fleet approached the seemingly defenseless planet. "No significant resistance detected," his sensor officer reported. "Their primitive defense satellites are trying to track us, but they can barely manage that." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Begin the first wave. Target their obvious military installations. Let's show them the futility of resistance." The Imperial ships launched their initial strike. Hundreds of energy beams lanced toward Earth, powerful enough to vaporize cities. But something unexpected happened. In the UN Command Center, Admiral Weber watched calmly as the Empire's weapons approached. Lieutenant Rogers counted down the seconds. Imperial weapons approaching. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. The energy beams hit Earth's atmosphere and vanished. In his flagship, Marcus leaned forward in shock. "Report." "Unknown defense system, sir," his weapons officer shouted. "Some kind of energy absorption technology. We're not reading any impacts." Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Thompson watched as the absorbed energy was redirected into Earth's power grid. Decades of studying alien technology had paid off. "Send the response signal," he ordered. Across Earth, hidden bunkers opened. What looked like normal mountains split apart, revealing massive weapon systems. The ocean's surface rippled as underwater facilities activated. In orbit, satellites that had appeared primitive suddenly shed their disguises. "Launch the first counterattack," Weber commanded. "Show them what humanity's been hiding." The Empire's fleet suddenly found itself targeted by weapons they couldn't understand. Beams of concentrated dark matter. Technology they thought impossible for Earth's level of development. Gravity weapons that twisted space itself. Missiles that didn't show up on any sensors until the moment they struck. "Impossible," General Reed shouted on the Imperial command channel. Their technology was primitive. "Our scans showed." His transmission cut off as his ship exploded, hit by weapons that shouldn't have existed. In the war room, Thomas watched with a mix of horror and fascination. "They hid everything," he whispered. "All their advanced technology. All their real weapons. What we saw was just a facade." The Empire's first wave faltered as ship after ship discovered that Earth's defenses were far beyond what they had prepared for. Their energy shields, designed to stop known weapons, proved useless against humanity's hidden arsenal. Weber watched the tactical display as humanity's true military power was revealed. Experimental fighters emerged from underground bases, their designs incorporating technology reverse-engineered from crashed alien ships over the decades. They moved in ways that defied normal physics, piloted by crews who had trained in secret for years. "Sir," Rogers reported, "Chinese quantum torpedoes are performing above expectations. Russian gravity disruptors are tearing through their formations. The combined European-American nanite swarms are disabling their smaller ships." The Empire's neat formations began to break apart. Ships designed for conventional space warfare found themselves facing weapons developed by a species that had spent centuries finding new ways to fight. Every time they adapted to one type of attack, Earth's forces switched to something completely different. On his flagship, Marcus watched in disbelief as a third of his fleet was destroyed or disabled in the first hour. "How?" he demanded. "How did they hide all of this?" Thomas stepped forward, his voice quiet. They didn't just hide it from us, sir. They hid it from themselves. Every nation kept their most advanced weapons secret from everyone else. What we're seeing isn't one military. It's dozens, all revealing their hidden strengths at once. Earth's counterattack continued, revealing layer after layer of defensive and offensive capabilities. The Empire's ships, for the first time in their history, found themselves outmatched not by superior technology, but by the sheer variety and creativity of humanity's weapons. Weber allowed himself a grim smile as another wave of Imperial ships retreated in disarray. "Send word to all commands," he ordered. "Phase 1 successful. Begin Phase 2. Let's show them what humanity can really do when we stop holding back." High Commander Marcus stood in the ruins of his flagship's main bridge. Emergency force fields contained the atmosphere, giving him a clear view of the destruction around him. Half of his mighty fleet was either destroyed or disabled. The rest were scattered, their perfect formations shattered by weapons they'd never seen before. "Status report," he demanded, his voice hoarse from shouting orders over the past hours. "We've lost contact with the entire 3rd Division," an officer reported, his uniform stained with smoke. "2nd Division is reporting massive casualties. 1st Division is barely holding together. We've never seen anything like this." Thomas worked at a damaged console, analyzing the battle data. "Sir, you need to see this." He brought up a tactical display showing Earth's attacks. They're not just using superior weapons. They're adapting their tactics faster than our ships can respond. Every time we develop a counter to one of their weapons, they switch to something completely different. A new alarm blared through the ship. On the main screen, they watched as another wave of Earth's forces emerged from hidden positions. These weapons were different from the last wave, as if humanity had been saving different technologies for each stage of the battle. "Impossible," Marcus whispered, watching another group of his ships fall to weapons that shouldn't have existed on such a primitive world. "How could they have hidden all of this?" "They didn't hide it, sir," Thomas replied quietly. "We just didn't understand what we were seeing." He brought up Dr. Miller's warning from days earlier. "They tried to tell us. Their entire history was preparation for this moment. Every war they fought taught them something new. Every conflict pushed them to innovate." Marcus watched as another Imperial ship succumbed to Earth's defenses. The proud vessel, designed to conquer primitive worlds, was torn apart by weapons born from humanity's long history of warfare. "Their warning," Marcus said slowly, "it wasn't a threat. It was mercy." "Yes, sir," Thomas agreed. They knew what would happen. They knew that once humanity united against an external threat, all their centuries of military advancement would be focused in one direction. They tried to spare us from this. Lieutenant Rogers' voice came over the Imperial command channel, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Imperial fleet, this is Earth Defense Command. You have 1 hour to retreat beyond Mars orbit. Any ships remaining after that time will be considered hostile and will be destroyed. This is your only warning." Marcus looked at the tactical display again. Earth's forces were holding position, clearly capable of destroying his remaining ships, but choosing not to. They were offering him a chance to retreat, something the Empire had never done in its long history of conquest. "Sir," Thomas said, "look at these readings. The weapons they've shown us. They're still holding back. Our sensors are detecting energy signatures we can't even classify. They have more surprises waiting if we continue this attack." High Commander Marcus straightened his uniform, his decision made. "Send the retreat signal to all remaining ships. Plot a course out of this solar system." He turned to face his war council, "and prepare a message to Imperial Command. Earth is to be classified as a protected world, too dangerous for conquest." As the Imperial ships retreated, Admiral Weber and Dr. Miller stood in the UN Command Center, watching them go. "They could have destroyed them all," Weber noted. "Why give them a chance to retreat?" Miller smiled slightly. "Because now they'll tell others. The galaxy will learn that Earth isn't just another primitive world to be conquered. will be known as the species that gave one warning, then defeated the mighty Empire when they didn't listen. In the deep of space, as his fleet limped away from Earth, High Commander Marcus recorded his final thoughts on the battle. We thought we were going to teach them their place in the galaxy. Instead, they taught us something. Some warnings should be heeded. Earth doesn't make threats. They make promises, and they keep them. The Empire's defeat spread quickly through the galaxy. The story grew with each telling. How humanity had hidden their true strength, how they had given one calm warning, and how they had defeated the Imperial fleet when that warning was ignored. Earth was never threatened by another alien force again. After all, as the galaxy learned, humans don't make threats. They just give one warning.